Hello, Tournament Poker Edge. This is Matthew Hunt, aka theginger45, back for another video series. This is going to be an interesting tournament. It's a two-day event played on Full Tilt Poker. Now, I know two-day events are becoming quite popular on a lot of sites. Full Tilt and Stars, and maybe even one or two other sites are starting to introduce these two-day events or these multi-flighted events as a great way to inflate the prize pools of low-stakes tournaments by giving people a chance to have more than one entry. Kind of like multi-entry tournaments on Full Tilt, but probably a little bit more of an effective way of improving prize pool sizes, I would think. So they're becoming quite popular, and this is an $11 tournament, so it's good value. It's 12K guaranteed. I think it had about 3K up top, and I imagine it being an $11 tournament that happens. I think it happens every day during the week, and has a very good sort of timing during the day for the kind of guys that are going to be playing in the European schedule. So I would think that a lot of you guys are probably going to be playing it, which I thought made it a great example to use for a series. So we're going to get cracking. Hand 1 is a non-event, so we're going to skip this one and we're going to move to hand 5, which is the first hand I'm actually going to play. So hand 5, this is an interesting one. It's something I've been experimenting with a little bit recently. We actually end up limping the small blind here. Now, a lot of regs have started doing this a little bit more often in tournaments than they might have used to. I'm not entirely sure what I think of it yet. This was definitely an experiment. This tournament, I think I did quite a bit of it with a variety of hands. I think I was limping almost 100% at one point when I was deep stacked. And I think here in this spot, with 250 big blinds deep against what looks to be a somewhat weaker player, I think there's definitely every reason to think that we could get away with limping 100% of hands here, and then limp calling our middle hands, limp folding our weak hands, and limp raising our strong hands. So there's something to be said for that strategy. Now, in a lot of different types of tournaments, higher stakes tournaments, I might adopt a mixed strategy. I might raise the small blind a lot more often, and occasionally limp with certain hands. But in general, I think that, like I said, I think it's important to consider this just an experiment, really. I'm not necessarily saying you should all go out and limp the small blind right away. I think you should, see how it works for you, try it out against different opponents, see how they respond to it, and then once you get an idea of what kind of ranges people respond to it with and how they react, then you can start developing a specific strategy. Because until you know how people at your stakes on the site that you're playing respond to limps in the small blind, it's hard to know exactly what strategy to adopt. On a lot of sites, if you take, for example, PokerStars.fr is a good example of a site where the player pool is it's more divided between very passive players and very loose aggressive players, very splashy players. So when you limp the small blind on stars.fr, you're much more likely to get someone either making a raise that's way too big if they have a strong hand, or checking back with too many hands as well. So you're much more likely to get more flops for cheap on a site like stars.fr. Whereas on stars.com, there's a lot more regs, and even the low stakes regs know that if you see someone limp the small blind, you can usually raise the big blind with a very wide range. So your raises are probably a bit more likely to get picked on certain sites than they are on others. So that's just an example of how you should adapt your strategy here. But in general, King Jack suited is a very, very good hand, blind on blind. It's hard not to look at this hand and think you have the nuts blind on blind, really, when you're against a weaker player. So I'm limping here, and I'm never ever folding. Unless he makes it some absurd amount. But we do limp, and he makes it 3x, so we're snap calling. And we flop pretty well. Top pair, good kicker. We're almost strong enough to check raise here, but I feel like his range is wide enough at this point that he's probably going to fold a lot to a check raise, whereas we might get some value on future streets if we just check call. So I prefer that, I think. And we do check call a half pot bet. Good. Okay, great. Not really a brilliant card on the turn, because obviously if he had 8-9, he has the nuts now. We lose to 10-7 or Jack-7, but those are only very small portions of his range, if anything. I don't necessarily know if he would even raise pre-flop with any of them. So we can certainly consider ourselves to have the best hand the vast majority of the time here, even though we are very, very occasionally drawing dead. I think I'm going to be check calling again and then deciding on the river. We do check, and he checks back. So at this point, we can pretty much rule out 8-9, I would think. We can pretty much rule out any kind of a set or two pair. So the top of his range now is probably like Jack-9 or Jack-8. I would say, again, he's pretty unlikely to raise with those pre. So that that's the, you know, the top of his range is a hand like that. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I'm right. What am I saying? I got turned around there. Yeah, no, the top of his range is something like that. I suppose it's possible he could be checking back the turn with a stronger jack, like a queen jack maybe, or a king jack if he's afraid I have 8-9. Some people get like that, but again, I think he's very unlikely to have more than one pair. I'm sorry, and I think he's mostly just going to have a lot of air hands here. So when this 9 peels on the river here, I don't think he has a lot of 8x hands in his range for raising pre or for betting the flop or betting the turn or checking the turn. Sorry. I think with 8-9 he would have bet the turn. I think with Jack 8 he probably would have bet the turn a decent amount of the time. 10-8 he might have checked the flop. 7-8 he probably would have. Yeah, 7-8 I guess makes sense. But again, he might not always raise it pre. So at this point, it's just really tough for him to have an 8. But it's also very tough for him to value bet a 2-pair here, and it's very tough for him to even have too many 2 pairs because we already said that he probably doesn't have too many 2 pairs when he checks the turn. So it would have to be a 2-pair that made 2-pair on the river, like a Jack 9 or a 10-9 or a 7-9. So with all of that in mind, King Queen is another one, which he probably would have. I imagine he probably would have barreled the turn as well with King Queen. So I'm thinking at this point, blind on blind, his range is just going to have a lot of ace highs. It's going to have a lot of ace queen, ace king. It's going to have some ace 6 offsuit, stuff like that. Does kind of depend on how wide his range was for raising pre, but we don't really have a huge amount of info on him so far. 75 hands, 35, 13. Tough to really say, but in general here, I think that the crux of this hand is really that there's not that many 8x hands that he would have played this way. So given that his range is a little bit polarized on this river, I think I feel okay check calling with a good top pair here. And we do check, he bets half pot, and we do call, and we lose to pocket 8s. But I'm pretty confident in saying that was only a very small portion of his range here, so I feel okay with the way he played this hand. So, nice hand us. Now, the very next hand number 7, king queen off. We flat on the button, very, very standard here. He's quite a tight player, not really any reason to 3-bet, definitely no reason to fold either. So, we like this, small blind comes along. And we get a lead out, and we have to decide call or raise. Now, I think call is okay because he does seem to be quite a tight player, and we risk getting a lot of folds out of hands we could get value from on future streets if we raise. Raising does look quite strong here to him. Calling also gets the small blind to call a lot of the time in a spot where he's drawing very, very thin. So having 3 players in this pot might not be the worst thing. So calling, I think, has its advantages. Raising also has its advantages. We play heads up, which can often be a lot easier. But I do think we get quite a few folds. So we're kind of relying on him having somewhat of a sticky tendency here with any kind of a jack. We don't want him to be considering folding a jack here. And I think a lot of tight players, I mean, 12-3 is very tight over a small sample. I don't know. It's possible he could fold a jack if he's really scared of us having a king. So we don't necessarily want to give him that chance. And I think I'm marginally in favor of calling here, just because there's only certain hands that we can get value from on a flop this dry, and I think we stand a better chance of getting value out of that range on the turn than we do on the flop. I think it's just really unlikely that we ever stack him here, so we're mostly looking for how to get 2.5 streets of value, something like that. So that's 1 street of value we got here, and now he's going to bet again, which I think is good news for us because at this point it's hard for him to have the other king, it's hard for him to have jacks full, 7s full, king jack. So we're very confident we have the best hand, but we also think he's got a pretty strong range at this point. So he's going to have a lot of pocket aces, a lot of pocket queens, ace jack, hands like that, maybe like an ace 10 or ace queen of diamonds. So I think raise is good at this point, and this is what I mean by getting 2.5 streets of value rather than 3. Well, actually, no, I suppose it's not. I suppose we're getting 3.5 because we get flop call, turn raise, and then if we get a river bet in as well, then I guess that counts as 3.5. Anyway, so I think we should go ahead and raise, and we do 6-14. Good sizing. I think if we made it too much bigger, we'd make it tough for him to call with his draw hands. If he does have diamonds, we made it say 800 or something, we'd make it tough for him to call. So I like this sizing. He does call. He just flats. It's good news because I think he's going to check call the river a lot here. So he checks again, and I think we're going to bet like a chunky 900, 1K, something like that here, and try to get try to get called by aces, queens, maybe tens even, maybe king 10 even, ace jack, stuff like that. He might hero us with ace jack. But we do bet 9, 3, 8, fine sizing, and he calls, and he has king queen as well. So I think we played that one pretty well. Would have been interesting to see what he would do with other parts of his range, though, because I think that's certainly pretty much the strongest hand in his range for playing the hand that way. I think weaker players at this level tend to, if he has a king, we're probably going to know about it on the turn. I would say I wouldn't imagine him bet calling with any full houses. So I would think, I would think that was about the top of his range we ran into there. So nice hand us. Okay, now this is a bit of an unconventional one, and quite an interesting hand. So we get a 3x open on the button from a guy running 10-8 over 346 hands. Now, I don't necessarily know if I had this entire sample on him at the time I played this hand, but it's reasonable to assume I had at least a decent portion of it, because it's unlikely I played all those hands in this tournament with him. So we do end up defending, and this is mostly just because we have a hand that it flops pretty well. It has a lot of value if we do make a flush, and at the same time we do okay against his range on the button. And with him being as tight as he is, his range on the button is wide enough for us to do well against, but he's also not going to be barreling that much if he misses the board. So if we do flop a king, for example, we're not going to expect to be put under 2 or 3 streets of pressure in a spot where we actually have the best hand. If we flop a king on a random dry board and he bets 3 times, we can pretty comfortably say that we're not going to be ahead very often against a player this tight. So the hand is mostly going to be pretty easy for us to play, is what I'm saying. And we also have the chance to make a flush, have the chance to take down a nice little pot with a top pair, something like that. So I think when we're this deep, I think calling king 3 suited is fine in the big blind. 160 big blinds or whatever we have, it's very, very deep. So I think if we were 70, 80 big blinds, I'd probably just ditch it. Maybe even maybe 60, I might even defend it, but 60 or less, I think I'm almost certainly just going to ditch it all the time, especially to a 3x. So yeah, anyway, we defend the king 3 suited, and we flop a king, obviously, because this hand wouldn't be interesting if we didn't flop something. And we check, which is very standard, and he checked back. And at this point, I'm finding it very hard to give him credit for having anything that might beat us right now. I think it's going to be occasionally the case that he's checked. If he does have like king 9, king 8, king 6, maybe those weaker kings, middle weak kings in his opening range on the button, which he should do, but he might not because he's tight, then he might check back those hands for value. The good news being, of course, that a hand like king 6 is going to chop against us very often. If he had ace jack, queen jack, I'd expect him to bet a lot. If he had 10-9, 10-8, queen 10, ace 10, ace queen, I'd expect him to bet a lot of those hands. So I think at this point his range is going to be a lot of like lowish pairs below 7s even, that he just doesn't want to bluff with. 8s, 9s, 10s, queens possibly even. If he checks queens, he's probably checking a lot of jacks as well. And maybe just some random ace highs he doesn't want to bluff with, ace 9, something like that. So I think we have the best hand like 90+% of the time here, except for the very small percent of the time he checks back a stronger king. So we're doing well. It's a good turn card. It's a very, very good turn card. Although very, very occasionally, like I said, he's going to have the king 10 sometimes. He's going to have the jack 10 occasionally. Definitely part of his range for checking back the flop. But again, the great news is we have the 3 as an out, we have the king as an out a lot of the time, and we also have the flush draw as well. So I don't see any reason not to bet here and put some chips in. We do bet, which is great. We get called by a lot of jack X hands here, a lot of queen jack, jack 9, ace 10, probably going to call us as well, stuff like that. So getting some good value here. And he decides to make a small raise, which is an interesting play. We can't fold because we have probably 9 outs going to the river, and if we do have 9 outs, then we only need 18% with no implied odds, and we got 20% here. We've got 4-1. So the odds that we're getting, even if we never won a single chip when we actually hit our flush, we would still be getting pretty much the right odds to call here. So I would say calling is pretty much mandatory here, but I'm never going to re-raise. I don't think there's any value in re-raising here. We're basically bluffing if we do, because we only ever get called by hands that crush us, and we basically just have a flush draw when we re-raise here. So not re-raising, just calling. Just going to see a river and see what happens. We do call, and we make the flush, which is great news. And there's 4 to a straight out there. On two, there's like a double straight out there. The queen or the 8 makes the straight. Ace queen makes the nut straight, but obviously there is one flush or 2 flushes that we lose to. Jack 8 of 3 flushes even. Jack 8 of clubs or 6-8 of clubs we would lose to, but I don't see him having too many of those hands. Yeah, and the nut flush of course as well. So I'm getting all turned around here. So yeah, I'm pretty sure we're going to check here because I'm not a huge fan of bet calling a raise and then leading out right again. I think at this point, if we just let out again, it would look very suspicious to him. And I think even if he just had a queen, then I think he would just call there. I don't think he would raise the river with a queen. But if we check and he has a queen and we check raise, I don't see him being able to fold a queen there. So I think check raise is the play because we're going to assume that he has a lot of queen X hands in his range. At this point, he also has some ace queens as well. If he has a 2-pair hand, he's just going to check back, but he would have folded to a bet there with a 2-pair hand anyway, most of the time, so we're not really missing out too much when he has 2-pair. So I'm thinking check raise here at this point. And we do check, which is good. He bets 300, and I would like to see us raise here for sure, and we do. 1K, yeah, that's good sizing. I like that. We're giving him odds of 2.73 to 1, 27%. So it's going to be pretty tricky for him to fold a queen here, but at the same time, we're getting some pretty good value out of it. So I like that sizing. I think if we'd gone like 1,500, that might have been big enough to start getting him to think about folding a queen. I mean, here, with this sizing, like, I don't necessarily know if I would expect him to value bet an 8 on the river or well, I guess he probably should, but or even to raise it on the turn, to be honest. But if he does have an 8 with this sizing, it's possible he'll just close his eyes and click call. But either way, we're getting very good value here. If he does come back over the top of us, so say he just like piles on us here, it's a horrible spot. But I guess we have to call just because I find it very hard to give him credit for the nut flush or the straight flush just from the action the way it's gone. There's just so few combos of those hands in his range, given how tight he is. He's not going to be opening every combo of ace X of clubs, and he's not going to be like checking back flop, raising turn with that many of those combos. So it's really only like ace jack of clubs or queen jack of clubs that he might do that with. Considering we have the king of clubs blocked, it's just really tough for him. Anyway, yeah, so we have check raised, and he ends up calling, and he has ace queen. So we did pretty well there. We got some good value. I think we played that one well. Like I say, I think the king 3 defend is pretty thin, but it's fine when we're this deep. So I like that hand. Okay, so this is hand number 33. This is an interesting one. We have pocket nines. We get a limp here from tight guy next to us, and we raise it. We isolate him to 3.5x. I think that's absolutely fine, and we get 3-bet. Now, this is where the hand becomes complicated, in that I don't think that many villains in a standard $11 tournament have much of a 3-bet bluffing range here at all. I think their ranges are extremely tight when they 3-bet us in this spot. I think we're looking at like 10s plus ace-king, like maybe ace-queen sometimes, but that's about it. I don't think they're 3-betting with 9s here. I don't think they're 3-betting with ace-jack suited. I don't think they're bluffing. This guy is 17-13 over 70 hands. He does have 20% 3-bet in position, but that's probably only like 2 or 3 instances, so we can hardly say much from that. At this point, I don't think there's any reason to 4-bet pretty much ever in this spot with 9s. The limper does fold. But at the same time, we're getting 2.73 to 1. We are very deep stacked, and if we flop a set, we stand a chance to get a very big pot of him because his range being so strong does give us very good implied odds. So I'm pretty comfortable just making the call here and not thinking too much about it. Not the best flop, but not the worst. The problem with it not being, well, the reason I say not the best flop is because at this point we are still kind of in no man's land of being in a pretty tricky spot against his range. We are obviously doing okay against a lot of his ace kings and ace queens if he has them, but we're completely crushed by any overpairs that he has, or I mean, if he has tens, we're completely, utterly crushed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run this hand through Flopzilla, or at least I'm going to run the basic scenario through Flopzilla, and we're going to see what sort of distribution of hands he has based on the ranges that we've given him, and we're going to try to work out what the play on this flop should be based on that. So just 2 seconds, and I will bring up the Flopzilla readout. So guys, this is Flopzilla. I know some of you probably have used it before, some of you probably haven't. It's a very useful program which basically lets you look at all kinds of flop and turn and river equities and gives you a great idea of how your hand matches up on different board runouts. So what we can see here at this point is that with our pocket nines, 9 of clubs, 9 of diamonds here, we have 32% equity against his range. So we're not doing very well at this point. Now, we were getting 2.73 to 1, like we said, so we only needed 27% equity, I think. So technically, if this was a one-street hand, if this was an all-in bet from him that he was about to make, where are we here? Let me just work this out. Okay, yeah, so 27%, 2.77 to 1, based on his bet sizing. So if this was a one-street hand, then we would technically have enough equity against his range with 32%. However, what we need to consider here is the fact that this isn't a one-street hand. So here, he has an overpair 55.8% of the time, and obviously when he has an overpair, we don't always lose. We occasionally bink a 9 on the turn, but sometimes he has a set, and we are virtually drawing dead. And sometimes, a lot of the time, he has overcards. He has this ace high 37.2% of the time. Now, what we need to think about here is the fact that we can't necessarily rely upon him completely shutting down every single time he has ace king or ace queen and misses on the turn, and B, we can't rely on him, actually missing the turn that often. So the hand doesn't end here, first of all. So his ace king and ace queen have some equity against us. You'll see here, based on the future board runouts, the hotness of the board, an ace or a king here is a card that basically guarantees us losing the hand. So that's a bunch of cards there that we don't want. A queen or a jack is a card that gives him additional equity with an ace king, so it's a card that he's definitely going to be barreling a reasonable percentage of the time if he's got any kind of sense about him, pretty much. And so there's really just not a lot of favorable runouts for us, considering the fact that we're behind so often and we are not in a great position even when we check call and we're ahead. We are in difficult spot out of position here. So I think check calling here would just about be okay if we had some kind of a read that he was more passive and he wasn't going to be barreling many turns. But actually the stats we have on his aggression level so far is actually 17% aggression on the flop, but 40% aggression on the turn. So that's only a small sample, but based on that kind of aggression level on turn and river, so far we've seen him show some aggression on those streets. So it's definitely looking a bit less likely that he's just going to knit it up and check back too often. So with all of that in mind, with this readout in mind, and with the situation, I think I'm probably advocating a fold here. It's funny because against a reg, against somebody that I thought had a slightly wider 3-betting range and had some bluffs in their range, I would definitely be just peeling this one. So for example, if we give him ace queen here, if we give him maybe like say ace 5 suited and 8-7 suited as bluffs, then he goes up to overcards 47%, which is a lot more often. Our equity goes up to 47% as well. So our equity just skyrockets by an extra 15% here. He's got a few more flush draws, 6% of the time, as opposed to some other percent. I mean, note how rare that flush draw is here. You'll see from a lot of these Flopzilla readouts that we do. It's just really uncommon for people to have flush draws. It's not anywhere near as easy for them to have flush draws on two flush flops as often as people think. So he's going to have more ace highs. He's going to have less percentage of overpairs. So even just adding a couple of bluffs into his range and adding ace queen in there definitely changed the situation of the hand a little bit. But at this point, I just don't feel comfortable asserting that your average player in an $11 tournament here, when we're 100 plus bigs deep, is going to be 3-betting hands like 8-7 suited and ace 5 suited. I think most of them are just going to be 3-betting straight up for value. And if they're doing that, then it's going to be, you know, I mean, tens plus ace king is possible. Jacks plus ace king could even be, you know, some people will flat jacks sometimes, but some people are nuts, and some people will 3-bet, you know, ace 10 off here. So if we did have a different read, we could adapt, but based on the read we have, I don't think there's anything we can assume other than that his range is quite tight here, and for that reason, I think it's probably a fold on the flop. But I don't completely hate if we did peel. But we didn't. We folded. So, yeah, I don't mind that play. I think that's good. I think it's a little tighter than I would usually be, but, you know, I would usually be peeling there at higher stakes in spots where people are, you know, they might be barreling turns a little bit more, but they're also going to be a little bit wider pre-flop, and the whole dynamic of the hand is just a little bit different if you're playing against a guy who's a bit less tight pre. So, yeah, I think that's an interesting hand, and I think Flopzilla is very useful for that one, so we're going to keep using it. Okay, so this is hand 37, pocket kings. We get a 2.5x here from middle position. I think this is a little small. I think he should be 3xing here from Hennessy X. Now we have 800 plus hands on him, and he's opening reasonably tight. He's from middle position here. You can see what's this early position stat, and then middle position 12%. He's opening from middle position, and we can see actually he's probably not very positionally aware because he's actually opening more from early position than he is from the button. So Hennessy X, if you're out there, you're opening too much in early position and nowhere near enough on the button and in the cutoff. So anyway, his middle position open is 12%, so he's going to be reasonably tight here. But we have kings, and there's no reason not to 3-bet here in a low-stakes tournament like this. So we 3x it. Seems fine. 400 even would have been okay, but we want to give him a chance to flat if he can. And he comes back over the top to 7, 8, 9. Now, first of all, I think that's too small of a 4-bet, especially when we're this deep, because in our situation at this point, no matter what we have, we're getting 2.99 to 1, so we need 25% chance winning this pot. And to have a 25% chance of winning a pot when you're in position, you know, 100 plus big blinds deep is rare. I think we're going to have a very high chance of winning this pot. So I think we're going to have, you know, by far more than 25%. So I think we would, whatever we 3-bet him here with, we would be calling this 4-bet. I don't think we would ever be folding to it. And considering we're not going to be 3-betting him with trash, anything that we 3-bet with is going to play pretty well post-flop. So with that in mind, he should be, whatever he's 4-betting with, he should be doing it bigger. He should be going to like 1K at least, 1.1, something like that. But anyway, despite that, I think at this point it's pretty unlikely to give him too many 4-bet bluffs in his range. I wouldn't expect him to be 4-bet bluffing much at all here. So I think the play is probably to just jam. And the reason for that is I think that just jamming, it makes our hand look like ace-king, and it makes him that much more likely to call off with queens or jacks. Whereas here, if we make it like 1,500, 1,600, it's a small 5-bet. I don't see him piling too wide of a range. I don't see him like just tooling out with something. And I think it might just give him a little bit more of a reason to consider making some hero folds or making some just, you know, some strange peels instead of getting it in. So I think I prefer to just 5-bet shove here because I just don't see him 4-bet folding queens or ace-king in this spot, or jacks even. So yeah, we go ahead and 5-bet small. So yeah, I should have mentioned at the beginning of this video, actually, I don't think I played that well in this tournament, even considering it's $11. I think I messed up a few hands. This is one of them where I probably made a slight mistake. I think this looks a little too strong. I think it would be slightly ridiculous for him to assume that we were ever 5-bet bluffing here, because who 5-bet bluffs in level 3 of an $11 tournament? I mean, nobody does. Nobody needs to. So yeah, I don't particularly like my play here, but he goes ahead and shoves, and we call, and he has ace-4 of spades, and I don't think you guys need me to tell you how terrible that is, but I'm going to tell you anyway. That's really terrible, and you shouldn't do it. Because, like I said, nobody is 5-bet bluffing in level 3 of an $11 tournament. So don't 6-bet pile the ace-4 of spades, because you'll probably run into kings. Yeah, anyway, we doubled up. Now we have tons of chips, and life is good. Okay, so we've moved on a little bit here. We're on hand 67, and we have pocket aces. And this is just a very minor point. I just want to stress that when we're this deep stacked, I ended up 2.5xing here, but I've actually moved towards a strategy now where I'm 3xing at this stack depth. If the majority of the table is, say, 60 to 80 big blinds plus deep against me, I'm going to be 3xing a lot. If it's a little bit shallower than that, if it's 40 to 60, then I'm going to be 2.5xing. And if it's less than 40, 35-ish, I'm going to be min raising. So at this point, I just feel like 2.5xing is going to lead to lots of multi-way pots when we're this deep, because everybody's got good implied odds to speculate, and it's going to make it harder for us to get stacks in when we do actually get 3-bet, or when we do have a big hand, which we do right now. So I would 3x here if I could play this hand again, and we do get called, as if to prove me right, we do get called by 3 players, but we do get a very dry flop, and we c-bet the sort of standard amount, just over half pot, and everybody folds. So it's a completely non-eventful hand. I just wanted to point out that I'm probably going to be 3xing there if this hand happens again. This is another fairly inconsequential hand, but I just wanted to show you that I think I made a mistake here, folding deuces under the gun. We are still quite deep against a lot of guys. We're 110 against this guy, or 100-ish against this guy, 75, 55, 56, 47. So I think we're deep enough to open any pair here, and I think folding deuces is a little bit tight. So I'm not a huge fan of that fold. If we were 40 bigs deep, I would probably ditch it a lot, but here I'm just opening any pair. Okay, a few hands later. This is an interesting one, hand 84, pocket fives. We get an open from 45 bigs in the cutoff. We could 3-bet here, but we don't have good blockers. It's such an easy spot for him to 4-bet us, and we don't really want to 3-bet to 5-bet here and just punt off 45 bigs in an early stage like this. So I'm very comfortable just flatting here. I think we have good chance to take the pot down, and obviously we could flop a set as well, which is nice. Now, this is an interesting flop. I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to go to Flopzilla again, because I think it would be really interesting to see how his range plays on this board, and what sort of equities we have, what sort of cards are going to affect the way the hand changes on future streets. Because this guy here, we can see he's a reg. We've got 1.7k hands on him, so we've played a reasonable amount with him on full tilt. If he's a reg, then it's possible we've played with him on other sites too. I just don't remember his screen name. So in terms of his cutoff open percentage, we've got 15% here. He's another one who's opening too much from early position and not enough from late, which is weird. But 15%, he's opening the cutoff. So we're going to give him something near a 15% range, perhaps a little bit wider than that. I don't know. We'll mix it up. We'll see how it goes. But we'll give him a 15% range, and we'll see roughly how our hand does on this board against that range, and what sort of turn cards we can expect to see and expect to be able to make plays on. And we're going to bear in mind that he's got 67% turn c-bet. So he's actually not c-betting the flop very often, but he's c-betting the turn quite often. So we can expect there that a pretty decent portion of the time that he c-bets the flop, he's going to barrel the turn as well. So we should bear that in mind. But yeah, give me a few seconds and I'll come back with the Flopzilla analysis. So here you can see the analysis that we came up with. Now, we've actually got his range on 16.3%, because I just felt like I looked at what a 15% range actually was, and I just couldn't see, if he's a known reg there, I just can't see him. I mean, he's very unlikely to fold ace-9, ace-8 suited, hands like that. I'm really surprised every time I see regs who are only opening 15% from the cutoff here, because not opening ace-8 suited here, or ace-9 suited, or 10-9 suited, or even like king-10 off, queen-jack off, it's really tight. So I've got 16.3, just give him the benefit of the doubt, that extra 1%. And we can see here from the way the board runs out that he's got overcards 63.6% of the time. So a reasonable amount of the time he's got some outs on future streets. Ace high sometimes. No made hand. I guess no made hand is like queen 10, something like that. But here we can see gut shot on overcards 4%. All this kind of distribution here. So he's only got an overpair 17%, or overpair or a set, which is good, because it means that a lot of his range here, a lot of these Broadwayish kind of hands have not connected with this flop. But the problem is here that given that he's someone that is going to be barreling a lot of turns, even though we have 51% equity against his hand, against his range at this point, sorry, all of these turn cards that are green here, the little green little green marker on the corner, you can see that all of these are going to be hands that change the board in his favor a little bit. So what they're going to be doing is making it very difficult for us to decide on turns where we stand. So what we have to think of here is that if we're going to call this flop, we can't call just for the sake of wanting to get to showdown, because there are going to be times when if we check back the turn and take a river, the board gets even worse for us, and we don't want to give him a free card because there's all of this number of cards that could potentially hit some parts of his range, and it's going to be very hard for us to tell his bluffs from his value bets then. It's not like we have a hand that's strong enough to bluff catch very often. So I would say here that if we just ditch the Flopzilla again, I would say here that calling is fine, but only if we're planning on betting a lot of turn cards. So I would bet any like jack or queen or 10 on the turn here. I would bet any club. I would bet any king or ace. And I would be, well, I mean, when you look at it like that, you've got any card 10 or higher or any club that we're betting. So, you know, even bearing in mind, you know, low cards, say it comes like a 4 of hearts. That's the kind of card where, you know, we might be able to check back and give a free card on the river, but we almost stand a decent chance of getting check called by ace high when it's a card that's that much of a brick, because there's so many jack 10s and queen 10s and queen jacks and king queen floats and stuff in our range that if he has ace king, then check calling that turn, if the turn is a 4 or a deuce or something, is going to look pretty good to him. It's going to look like he's bluff catching pretty well. So I'm fine with calling this flop if we are prepared to show aggression on future streets, because 5s is just not going to do that well on a drawy board like this against a range that includes a lot of overcards, Broadway cards, gut shots, some flush draws, things like that. And I think if we're not prepared to show aggression on future streets, then we should just fold the flop. But as long as we're okay with, you know, firing and turning our hand into a semi-bluff on some turns, just to sort of fold out his 6 outs and make the river a lot easier to play, I think calling here is absolutely fine. And one other thing you'll note about the Flopzilla, if I bring it up again here, is that with this 15% range, 16% range, flush draw on this flop, he has a flush draw 5.68% of the time. All of the time that he has the flush draw, he has overcards, and so it's, you know, it's really hard for him to have a flush draw here. And people who are, I see a lot of, you know, my own students I've worked with on hands where they've immediately just started thinking first and foremost about what frequency the opponent has a flush draw, and to a certain extent that's a valid concern, but to a certain extent they're also massively overestimating the likelihood of them actually having those 2 flush draw cards. And here, even if we put any suited hand in his range, right? So this literally, his range is now 36%, and he's got every single suited hand in the deck in his range. Even if he has all of those hands, he still only has a flush draw here 14% of the time, which gives you just, you know, a little bit of an insight into just how unlikely it is that people make flush draws. It's not that easy to make a flush draw. So I'm not saying completely discount them. I'm not saying they should be the last thing you think about, but I'm also not saying that your first concern is, well, he might have a flush draw. And, you know, that's certainly what I hear from a lot of people. So think first and foremost about what his range is, and then determine how many flush combos and how many flush draw type hands are really in that range. Because even if he has all the suited cards in the deck, he's unlikely to have it that often. So yeah, interesting hand. Let's see what we actually did. What we did in this spot was fold. Okay, quite surprised to see myself fold there, but he did make it reasonably large on the flop. If he'd made it like 300, 350, I almost certainly would have peeled. I think I probably still should have peeled, even given this sizing. So this is probably a small mistake. But maybe I just had a feeling, you know, maybe I had different stats on him on the day, and he had more aggression or something. Let me just check. Oh, I've got you stats up to day of hand. Okay, so actually I did have these stats on him, and I guess I just decided he was feeling aggressive. Maybe he snapped bet on the flop or something, I don't know. But anyway, I think it's a little tight to fold, but it's not terrible. So let's move on. Okay, so this is an interesting one as well. We've got the ace-queen off here. We min-raise, and again, going back to the raise sizing debate from before, I think it would be okay to 2.5x here, but given that we have a 25 big blind stack in the big blind, we have two 40-ish big blind stacks to our left, I think we're just about shallow enough to min raise here. We want to give ourselves a little bit of maneuverability, so I'm okay with this sizing. We do get a fold, and then we get a 3-bet in the small blind. Now, the small blind here, we have 473 hands on him. He seems like a reg from his 1914 stats, but this is a relatively, I want to say relatively aggressive reg, but this is quite a big gap between his VPIP and his PFR, and usually the bigger the gap, the more passive someone is in general, at least in some instances anyway. He's got 5% in position 3-bet and 7% out of position, so that's not a particularly aggressive player. If you average that out to 6% or so, then that's a pretty average level of aggression. 6 to 7% is the usual sort of standard 3-bet number for most players, or most regs at least. So I'm not expecting him to be bluffing here a huge amount of the time. It is a pretty good spot for him to be wide, considering that he's probably likely to be aware that I'm going to be opening very, very wide on this stack size. Especially if we have 470 hands against each other, he probably knows my screen name. He probably recognizes me, and he's probably likely to think that I'm a reg and I'm going to be opening wide here. So that it wouldn't surprise me to see some bluffs in his range here, even with it being only 61-20. We're already in the ante stage, so he might have some suited aces here. He might have some offsuit Broadway cards for blockers. It's definitely not a bad spot for him to sneak in a little bluff. And it gets back to us and we call. And the reason we call here is just because we're kind of in a spot where if we 4-bet, say we 4-bet to like 1300, we put ourselves in a spot where he's going to shove a lot of the time. Well, say for simplicity's sake, we just made it pot. Say we made it 1490, 1500 or so. There'd be about 3k in the pot. He'd shove another 4.2k. And it'd be about 2.5k for us to call into like a 7k pot. So it would be pretty tough for us to 4-bet fold here. There's not really a sizing that's convenient for us to 4-bet fold, and yet we don't necessarily want to have to be priced into getting it in with ace-queen here either. So considering that, we don't really want to 4-bet call, and we don't really want to 4-bet fold. We definitely don't want to fold, considering his bluffs in his range. So call is the play here. Call, I think, is pretty much the only play. Now, this is really interesting because this is a flop that when we raise and flat a 3-bet here in this spot, this flop absolutely nails our range. So we have a very strong range on this flop. We can have king-queen, we can have jack-10, we can have ace-queen, possibly some ace-king, king-jack, pocket nines, possibly queen-9, possibly king-9 even, suited versions maybe. Whereas he can have a set of kings, a set of queens, probably a set of nines, and aces and ace-king, but he can't really, I guess he can have ace-queen as well, but he can't really have jack-10 very often. I think he'd be much more likely to flat jack-10. He can't really have king-queen. I think he'd flat that too. He's also reasonably, like I said, he's got some bluffs in there, so if he does have a bluff, his bluffs, like his suited aces, are very likely to have almost no equity on this board. Some of his other bluffs, if he has like a 7-8 suited, that's got no equity either. So a lot of the top parts of his range do hit this board as well, the same as we do. But the difference is that we have much fewer hands that are complete air in our range than he does in his. So I'm expecting him to bet here very often, and I'm expecting us to call just because we're too strong to fold at this point, given the air that's in his range. But he does check, which is a really interesting decision, and I can't really see too many hands that he should be checking here. I think he's going to have a lot of pocket 10s and pocket jacks when he checks. He's also possibly going to be slow playing sometimes, but we have pocket aces blocked, we have ace-king blocked, and I think those hands are strong enough for him to value bet on this flop anyway. So I would be quite surprised to see him check those hands. I'd be quite surprised to see him check a set again because because of how hard it hits our range. I would be expecting him to value bet all of his strong hands. So I do think when it gets to us here, the problem with betting is that the hands in his range that do have some showdown value are mostly hands like jacks and tens, and those hands are not that likely to call a bet if we bet here. Say we put in 800 or something. It's kind of easy for him to just check fold those hands at this point. Yet if we check back, it makes it look like we have much less of a strong hand. It takes a lot of the king, queen, jack 10 hands out of our range, and it makes it a lot easier if he does have tens or jacks, which we're going to assume is his hand a lot of the time here, for him to check call the turn. So I'm going to check back here and try to get value on future streets, I think. Yeah, there we go. So turn is a total brick, which is great. Also, we have that ace of hearts, which is even better, because it does mean that if he was bluffing with some kind of a suited ace, it can't be the hearts now, which means he can't have a flush draw. So he does end up betting out, which is very interesting. Now, we said on the flop he was going to have a lot of jacks and tens, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense for him to bet out with jacks or tens here. So we're going to start to have to reevaluate our assumptions about his flop range. It's possible that he was giving up on the flop, and now he's changed his mind. So maybe he did have like an 8-7 of hearts on the flop, and he's picked up a flush draw. Maybe he had like an ace-jack of hearts, and he's picked up a flush draw now, or he didn't decide to bet his gut shot on the flop. Those are some hands in his range. But again, because we've more or less taken out a lot of the very strong hands, we've taken out a lot of the pocket kings, aces, ace-king, those kind of hands. I think it's a pretty good spot to call here, because it's just increasingly difficult to see him having a hand better than ours too often. And when we're getting 3.38 to 1 here, we don't need to be good very often, and I think we are good pretty high percentage of the time at this point, so we're going to call. And that's not a very good river card at all. It's not a very good river card for our actual hand, because it means that a lot of the time if he does have, if he does have jacks or tens now, we lose. If he does have ace-jack now, we lose. Some other hands that he might, it's possible he had like a jack-9, and he just decided to turn into a bluff on the turn. It's possible he had jack-10 and flopped the nuts, and was trying to slow play that. But it's not likely. So he's not likely to have that many jacks. But the problem is now that he's going to have a lot of hands that that do beat us in terms of he's going to have some more two pairs. He's going to have some, maybe some queen 10 or queen 9. I'm trying to figure it out really. Again, it's a strange line for him to take, but it's also a line where some of his bluffs that he was giving up on the flop, like I said, and then decided to bet on the turn, some of those are going to have jacks in them. And if he bets out here, I just don't see how we can call. I don't see how we can. I don't see how we can really have the best hand at this point. Whether it's that he's made two pair or that he's he's made a straight, I just don't think we're going to have the best hand very much. If you think about it, like King 8, King 8 still beats us. Queen 7, Ace 9. It's really hard. Like on a 4 straight board like that, it's really hard to find a hand that actually is worse than second pair that he might play. So I'm not a fan of calling if he bets. However, he checks. So at this point, we need to reevaluate, and we need to think, well, once he establishes a checking range here, what's in that range, and what do we do against it? So I think it's possible he would check a jack here. It's not that likely, but it's possible. I think it's definitely possible he would check ace-jack here, and with the intent of check shoving, because he's got the great stack size for it. If he checks, we bet 1k, he shoves, we call with the jack. At least that's from his perspective. So I would say probably the best bet here is to assume that he does occasionally have a jack, but he's also going to have a lot of hands that are checking for showdown value. So with that in mind, and with the fact that it's so difficult for us to find a hand that we actually beat at this point, I think our best bet is to actually make a bet here and to try to get him off a weak 2 pair or pocket aces or an ace king or something like that, or even a set. It's possible he would fold a set here, because there's a lot of jack X hands in our range when we check flop and call the turn. A lot of queen jack, jack 9, king jack, so much of it. So once he's checked here, I think it's a spot that we have to, we have to take advantage of this bluff opportunity. I think we need to bet like 1.5k, really try and sell this idea that we have a jack here. And I believe we end up checking back, and I'm quite disappointed with that, because I think this is a really good spot for us to turn our hand into a bluff. Because I just think there's so many more non-jack hands than jack hands in his range on the river, and I very much doubt he's going to check call with I mean, if he did have king queen, he might check call their top two pair, but again, it's unlikely he has that. So, based on our assumption of his flop range and his pre-flop range, so I think we missed a bluff spot there. I don't like the fact that we check back and he does end up having ace king. So, I guess he was just playing the flop quite cautiously, considering how much it smashes our range, which I can kind of understand, but at the same time, ace king is still top pair, top kicker. He would definitely get a bet out of us on the flop with a lot of our range. So I think he maybe played that one a little too passively. But I also think we did too. So I think we should have probably taken that bluff spot on the river. This is an interesting one. This is pocket jacks, obviously. And we're going to limp. So this is another limping strat hand from the beginning. Now, obviously, you can see from the fact that we're limping jacks that we're limping 100% here, or more or less 100%. We're limping at a whole playing range, and we do get raised by this guy in the big blind, which is great. So he's playing 34-13 at this point. I don't think it's the same guy as earlier when we limped, but it might be. I don't think it is. So he just 3x's, which indicates that he's got some kind of a hand that he's probably more likely to be okay with playing post-flop. I think if he 4x or 5x, which you see some guys do blind on blind, then it's much more likely to be a weak hand that he just wants to take it down with. But we're not gonna limp call at this point. I'm pretty sure we're gonna limp re-raise, because I think this is great stack sizes for us to limp re-raise to 1200 to 1400, and then him to just shove with some hand that he just doesn't believe us with. So I'm pretty okay with the limp re-raise here, and we do go ahead and make it 1440. A little bit big, I might go a little smaller, but at the same time, this kind of spot, or this kind of sizing, we're giving him 2.17 to 1 here, so we're making it a little bit less likely for him to call. And this is actually a spot where, in some instances, bigger, people's assumption is that bigger sizing makes it more likely people are going to fold. Which is true in a lot of instances, but the thing here is that I think what bigger sizing can actually do, even though I do prefer a smaller sizing, but what I think bigger sizing can actually do is take some hands, instead of taking hands that are in his folding range and putting them in his calling range, what it does is take hands that might be in his calling range if we bet smaller, and put them in his shoving range for now. Because if he still thinks that we're if he still doesn't believe us, he thinks that we're bluffing in some way, and he has like pocket sixes. If we made it really small, then he would probably just peel with those. But if we make it slightly bigger to the point where he can't peel, we make it possible that with more money in the pot, he'll just decide to pile on us, because he feels like we're bluffing, but he also can't call. So actually, there are some instances, particularly in these 3-bet and 4-bet wars, where bigger bet sizing can actually win you more chips by creating a weaker impression, and making it harder for people to call at the same time. So thereby taking hands out of their calling range and putting them in their shoving range. And I think that's maybe what I was trying to do here. But he does end up calling anyway, so mission failed. But we flop a set, which is great news. So let's see what we do. We bet 960. Now, this is a really small bet, obviously. It's less than a third pot. Generally, I've moved away from the small bet sizing that so many people tended to like for a long time in MTTs. I have moved more towards a more standard bet sizing of like going, between sort of 45 and 60% a pot a lot of the time, and occasionally bigger as well to put more pressure on. But I do think this is a pretty decent spot to bet this sizing, just because I think his range for calling that limp 3-bet is reasonably wide, and I think with it being so hard, with us having this board so locked down, it's very hard for him to have a jack. It's pretty hard for him to have pocket nines. I think he would have shoved that pre. Pocket sixes, I think he would have shoved pre too. Any overpairs, queens, kings, aces, I think he would have shoved pre. Any strong diamond combos, ace, king, ace, queen of diamonds, he probably would have shoved pre. So we're looking at, like, with decent flush draws, we're looking at like king, queen of diamonds, and maybe queen 10 of diamonds, because I have the jack of diamonds. So it's just hard for him to have strong hands here. So what I'm trying to do here, I think, is try to make a bet sizing that's small enough that he might peel it with just a random king queen of clubs, or king queen offsuit with one diamond maybe. but also that he might peel it with, like, if he has like 9-10, ace-9, even like ace-10 with 1 diamond, stuff like that. I just want him to peel as much as possible here because I want him to pick up some equity on the turn. The stacks are shallow enough here that, you know, with 4k in the pot on the turn, if he calls again here, it's going to be about 5k in the pot. He's going to have 4.5 behind or something. If it's a scare card, or if it's a card that I think makes the board a lot trickier to play, like say it's a 10 of diamonds, I can just shove the turn to avoid seeing a river. But if it's like a total blank, like a deuce of clubs, then I can just bet really small again and try and get him to peel again or spew over me. I have lots of options on future streets with this small sizing, so I do like this sizing. Whereas if it was like, say I flopped a set here and it was like king, say it was like king jack 7, and I had middle set, it's basically the same thing because he can't have top set, but he can have a lot more king x hands and a lot more strong hands there. So if the same pot happened and the flop came out king jack 7 with a flush draw, then I would probably bet like 1400 and then try to just get it all in on the turn with a much more comfortable shove. Whereas on this particular flop, because it's just so hard for him to have a strong hand, I bet a lot smaller. But he does end up folding anyway, so kind of irrelevant. But I hope that made sense, and I think that's a pretty interesting little spot with a limp re-raise. Again, limping strat, just an experiment, but worked out pretty well this time. Okay, probably going to zip through a couple more hands. So this king jack off, very easy open, 2 short stacks here, so we're min raising. We've got 135 big stack in the big blind who defends. He's quite tight here. This is a very blank flop. I don't imagine it hitting his range too hard, so I don't see any reason not to c-bet. We do c-bet, pretty decent sizing, standard, and he check min raises us. Now, this is a weird play. It's a weird play because he's giving us 5.33 to 1, so it's almost tempting just to peel. If I thought he had any real significant bluffs in his range here, then I would probably peel this, especially if I had a heart in my hand. I would peel it because I'd have much more playability on future streets. But at this point, I'm pretty confident he's going to have a lot of quite strong hands here, a lot of ace-9, king-9, pocket 7s, pocket 4s, pocket 9s. So I'm just not that comfortable that we have enough equity to continue here, even though we have the backdoor straight draw. I think if we had the king of hearts, I'd probably peel this. But Jack of hearts is very close. Otherwise, no, I just don't think we can really peel because I think there's too many occasions where we're virtually drawing dead here against like a set, or maybe even 7-9 for 2 pair, or like 8-7 of hearts or something like that. So, yeah, I'd prefer to have some kind of more backdoor equity here, and we do fold. So that's that. Okay, so this is going to be the last hand of part 1. This is just a little example of why I don't like low pairs in early position. I opened here with 30 big blinds or so with pocket 4s, and I'm actually not a huge fan of it. The reason is because if we bring up Flopzilla, we can see here that pocket 4s on the average flop, so this is just on any random flop, is going to make weak pair 79.6% of the time. So we only hit 18% of the flops, and that means, you know, hitting includes like a gut shot or a flush draw of some kind, and it, you know, so often we're just going to have such a weak hand, and with 2 other players in the hand as well, you know, it's going to be even worse. So we got called in 2 spots here, and we're just not going to be doing very well against these ranges in this spot. And if I flip things around in a second and look at our hand versus their ranges on this board, we're going to be doing pretty terribly on average. So we'll see. Just 1 second. Okay, so I've run Flopzilla here. You can't really enter in 3 ranges in Flopzilla, at least as far as I know. So I've just done 1 range to kind of represent the sort of hands that these 2 players are generally likely to be coming into this pot with. And you can see here that pocket 4s, we do have 48%. If that was 1 hand, I mean, obviously got to bear in mind that those cards are distributed between 2 players now because we can't do 3-handed. So our equity is going to be much less than that. But you can see here just how many cards in the deck are unfriendly to us on future streets here. 7, I mean, an 8 or 9 pairs the board, but 7, 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace, just anything. But anything that's not a 4 really. So, you know, they're going to have a lot of overcards between them. They're not going to have a made hand very often, which means they are going to fold to a c-bet sometimes here. But the problem with one of them being a short stack, as we can see, is that, you know, if we bet, say we bet 800 here and he check shoves, he's going to have enough jack tens and flush draws and stuff that it's going to be tough for us to fold any pair there. So it is a really tricky spot. But this is just an example. And, you know, if we just randomize the flop here, you know, you can see that it's just it's very unlikely for us to have more than about 40% equity here. 21% on that one, 39, 34, 27, you know, so in early position, I'm just not crazy about playing flops when we have that little equity and that little in the way of maneuverability here. So I would definitely be in favor of folding pocket fours here. I think I would open like sixes plus, but even sixes is a bit shaky in early position. So yeah, that's about it. I should wrap it up there. I'm getting towards just over the hour mark. So that's the end of part one. We've got through 146 hands, which is good. So I've got about another 90 something to go in part two of this series, and then we're going to move on to day two after that. So thanks guys, and I will see you next time.